time and again, I think we hear, even to ask for a pricing, your value is kind of to set that value proposition with the clients as an industry, as what an architects provide. What have you seen that change? Is it becoming better? How can we do that better if not the practices we're already doing? That's how I came up as the first step in terms of pricing, creating that value. If not, how do you see it?
Well, this is a complex question that does relate to what I said a minute ago about sort of 19th century versus 20th century approaches, because the profession in the U.S., I think probably all of North America, started as this gentleman's profession. That mostly only wealthy people could be engaged in it, and the business pricing aspects of it just weren't important, and we struggle with this anti-business legacy, I think. And I'm happy to be in a profession where the bottom line isn't the only thing that's important. We all know that. We have a long way to go before that's the case. Nobody wants that. But how we approach our value in the construction industry is a really complicated question. And I think one of the problems is that there's that we haven't been able to communicate the value of our profession to the society at large, right? And so our clients don't have that appreciation either. And I think that's where it's really important for us to see when we need other professions to help us out, like marketers, people who are expert communicators, and influencers, and people who understand how to do selling and business development, and then the pricing part of that becomes a little easier if there's a value associated. A lot of in the public, there's a public perception of, architects, only design things that are really expensive or impossible to build, or contractors, the sort of adversarial relationship with contractors, and this sort of reputation that architects have in the public, which couldn't be further from the truth. If based on my observation, I think that our communicating our value to the public, demystifying what we do, being better at communicating is really important. Using the skills of marketers and others to help people understand our value. I mean, I think one of the mistakes that architects make frequently is thinking they can do everything themselves. And there are people who have real expertise in understanding value proposition and communicating it, and using that is really helpful. So that's one side of it. The other side of it has to do with financial understanding, and understanding the cost of the effort it takes to do projects. So that starts with simple things like keeping your time, with understanding the value of the hours that are being put in to a project. But that doesn't mean you should charge by the hour. Charging by the hour can be a real trap, because the better you get at it, the faster you do it, the less you get paid. Is that crazy or what? So if you can keep track, if you understand the costs of doing the work, then you can understand what a reasonable price is, adding a profit margin, and of course a margin for overhead and the other costs of doing business, plus a profit margin. Then you can understand what a reasonable fixed fee, or there are many different ways of charging, and fixed fees or percent of construction. And I think all of them have their place, even hourly, because sometimes you're in a very unpredictable circumstance, like dealing with regulatory environments that, take months and months to get a permit or whatever. And yeah, there's a place for hourly work, but you have to make sure your hourly rate is high enough. And one of the ways that American architects are different from Canadian architects is that in the US, the AI professional organizations like the AIA are not allowed to publish any kind of pricing schedule. In Canada, they do. Architects at least have a reference point of what a reasonable percentage of construction or hourly rates are likely to be. In the U.S., we don't have that. And in the 70s, the Justice Department sued the AIA, and that was eliminated. So since then, architects have sort of been on their own. And not only was that eliminated, the pricing schedule eliminated, but the AIA had to make an agreement that nobody could ever talk about pricing with one another, because that would be considered price fixing or colluding. Now, that's, price fixing or colluding definitely should not be allowed. But just talking with each other about fees is not the same thing as fixing or colluding. But it's been interpreted that way. And so people are very hesitant to talk about fees to one another. Everybody is operating in the dark. But all I can say is that you've got to make sure that your fees, cover your costs plus a profit margin. And you've got to have a profit margin in there because, that's the only way your firm is sustainable. I don't mean to have too much emphasis on profit, but costs go up every year. So, your revenue needs to go up as well. And you need to have a margin between what it costs you and what your revenue you're getting in order to have money for the next year, in order to increase salaries, in order to, keep up with the cost of doing business. There's been a tremendous increase in the salaries, which in the architectural workplace in the last 4 or 5 years, and I support that. I think we've been way underpaid, but it puts stress on business owners, and they have to understand that somehow it becomes even more critical that our value proposition is really understood.